Thank you. So every year we invite the incoming president of CILIP to talk to us. And this year I'm delighted to welcome Sue Williamson, who is interrupting her holiday in Canada to join us. At least it is a reasonable time in the morning, I think. About 9 o'clock, about 9:30, something like that. So Sue has worked in public libraries in a variety of roles for 25 years, including as head of library services for St Helens Borough Council. And then until her recent retirement, she was Director of Libraries for Arts Council England. In that role, she chaired the English Public Library Strategic Working Group and worked on major projects such as accreditation, the work on the Single Digital Presence Library and the CILIP-led projects on working internationally, right in our area, and green libraries. She also commissioned reports on public libraries' impact on employability and the impact of the Summer Reading Challenge, and supported the Big Jubilee Read. For her services to public libraries, she was awarded the MBE in the Queen's Jubilee Honours List. So she is the perfect person to talk to us this morning, this afternoon, whenever it is. So over to you, Sue.
Thank you very much, Leslie, and thank you for that amazing introduction. Yes, I want to talk to you this morning about CILIP, the initiatives that it's led over particularly the past year, which are putting it absolutely at the forefront of thought leadership in our sector, and which include looking at the progress of the international links. For those of you who don't know me, Leslie's introduction was very thorough. I like to say that I have worked in and for public libraries for over 25 years, because for the last 5 years, as she said, I was Director of Libraries for Arts Council England. My practical career in libraries, I finished as Head of Library Services in St Helens in Merseyside, where I had responsible not solely for library services, but also for the archive, for adult and community learning, and for arts and culture. And St Helens was a borough which was already working very well with Arts Council England, was really capitalising on the potential of that relationship, because the Arts Council had recently been appointed the National Development Agency for Public Libraries when I arrived in 2013. And I learned such a lot there, and that enabled me to apply for the role of Director Libraries for the Arts Council. So far from it being, you know, small borough library service, nice end to my career as Head of Services, it opened a lot of doors. And I held that post for nearly 5 years before I retired in November 22. And I'm now immensely proud to be President of CILIP, of our professional organisation. If somebody had said to me that I would be doing this when I started out in 1999 on my career, I'd have laughed them out of court. So, I mean, I'm just delighted to be here. So when I worked in St Helens, which was, as I say, quite a small service, I still had well over 100 staff, and only 2 members of those staff were members of CILIP, and I was one of them. To be honest, in that service, I would have struggled then to sell CILIP to those staff. For a library assistant or a senior library assistant, they couldn't see themselves either reflected in or supported by CILIP, which talked a lot about librarianship and concepts that might have been useful to their senior staff and heads of service, but not to them. There was also a cost implication. And while it isn't hugely expensive to be part of CILIP, Lord knows nobody goes into librarianship for the money. And for many of those junior staff, it was a financial commitment that they needed to be able to see was definitely worth their while. So, I mean, I did try and raise, while I was there, I tried to raise the profile of CILIP. I entered the service for the CILIP Libraries Change Lives Award, and we were shortlisted, and that helped raise the profile. But despite my best efforts, I was simply unable to encourage anybody to go for ACLIP, let alone chartership. Now, I genuinely, 10 years on, do not think that that is the case now. And some of that is due to my work at the Arts Council, because what I had was a development budget, and I was the only director that had a development budget. So I had about 780,000 that I could invest every year in projects that were allowing library services to develop. And so I was able to support some of the key initiatives that CILIP has developed over the past few years. And as Leslie said, some of the investigative reports that CILIP prepared. And one of those was definitely the International Year, the international conference, and those international bursaries that enabled staff to undertake work with other librarians across the globe. I would also say that the CILIP 125 initiative has been enormously successful in saying to junior staff, CILIP is there for you. It's keen to hear your ideas, it's invested in your future, and we're here to support you on your career pathway with your career development. And I want to look a little bit at that strand of what CILIP does. So again, one of the things I funded when I was at Arts Council is the Welcome to Libraries booklet that's available for all library services to download when new staff join them. It is primarily aimed at public library staff, but nonetheless, the underlying messages are there. The importance of our profession as a profession, the ethics and principles that guide us, and why you, at whatever level you've joined, have joined a profession that matters. And it's brilliant giving staff at all levels that sense of the profession and that direction for a proper career path. So CILIP now offers apprenticeships, which can lead on to ACLIP and thence to chartership, which is still the aspirational benchmark for our profession. And now, through that pathway, is open to all who work in libraries. And this is game-changing for those who either can't or don't want to go to university. And for those like me, who came into the profession late, armed with some life experience and maybe a degree in another subject, and still want to build a career. When I came into libraries in 1999, there was no option available. There wasn't ACLIP until 2005 when CILIP introduced it. And when I asked our training unit at the library service in Cambridgeshire, what could I do to build a career? They just kind of stared at me and said, well, there isn't anything really, unless you go back to university and do a first degree. So CILIP now has that complete pathway based on experience and practice, and is shortly going to be introducing a level 7 apprenticeship for library leaders. It's also very active in various areas of thought leadership, which position libraries across the sector as vital ingredients in 21st century lives. The ethics and values of our profession are clearer and more accessible than ever, and form a really solid base from which to build professional practice. In my time at the Arts Council, I started the process of refreshing the publication Managing Safer and Inclusive Libraries, which was published last year. It's a free practical guide to managing issues around censorship, freedom of expression, and freedom of access to information in public libraries through looking at 4 key areas: managing stock, public activities and events, access to spaces and facilities, and supported internet access. This has never been more important than now, when libraries across the world are finding their ability to operate independently and without censorship under increasing threat. Just look at what's happening in the United States and the pressure that libraries and library staff are coming under with regard to their practice and their collections. I've always been keen to defend the principle that all material should be potentially available through the library. If you work in public libraries, you get lots of queries about stuff that is available through the website in the library, whether that is allowed or not allowed. You get queries about books that are on the shelves. Should they be on the shelves? Should they not be on the shelves? And you have to be able to deal with it. And I've always taken the standpoint that provided it is not illegal, the library has a duty to show all viewpoints and all thought processes. Librarians are not and should not be censors. And I was hugely encouraged by a project that I heard about when I went to a recent conference in London. This was a conference organised by the British Library called Press Play to celebrate the work that they're doing on the Single Digital Presence Library On programme. And I would really encourage you all to explore through their website, libraryon.org, what is going on there, because it's really interesting and exciting. So they convened this conference to showcase the work that's being supported or highlighted through the programme. And one project that was presented is being delivered by Brooklyn Public Library in the United States. And this is really significant given all the turbulence that's going on around censorship in the US at the moment. The project is called Protecting the Freedom to Read: Books Unbanned and Digital Access for Teens. And this enables all young people between, I think it's the ages of 12 and 23, across the continental United States to join a digital library service, which ensures that they can read the things that they want to read without fear or intervention, even in states where libraries' collections are being decimated. At the moment, they are operating free and clear, and let's hope that that continues to be the case over the next few years, because I think this is an absolutely brilliant programme. Managing safer and inclusive libraries is a blueprint for how to navigate these increasingly perilous waters, and is exactly the kind of thought leadership that CILIP needs to be at the heart of. And similarly, the Green Libraries project, led jointly by CILIP and the British Library, and again initially funded through the Arts Council, has enabled librarianship to appear prominently in initiatives and solutions to raising awareness of the issues around climate change. And last November's conference, Libraries Rewired, which was held in London, focused on innovation in the digital sphere and was extremely successful. So much so that plans are now afoot to hold another conference in the near future. The pace of change in the digital world is staggering and somewhat daunting, but it is happening and will continue to happen. And libraries have such a key role in ensuring that all our citizens have the tools and the skills to be able to keep pace with that change. For those of you who've read The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, in medieval times, those who had access to books had power. Today, those who can provide access to information that informs, educates, and enriches our lives in whatever format have the potential to have the same power and influence. And for librarians to encourage people to develop informed but independent thought, not coming under undue influence. CILIP has also just launched the Public Libraries at Risk Monitor to record and, where possible, support those library services that are finding themselves in financial difficulty and about to be restructured. For those of you who are not aware, and I'm sure you are, at the moment, Birmingham, for example, is under incredible pressure, with 25 of their 35 libraries threatened with closure. And that's being replicated across councils across the country. When I was in the Arts Council, I think I was saying that by 2025, 28% of councils would be on the cusp of declaring Section 114, and that's really, really scary from a library service perspective. And something that some of you may find hard to believe is that a lot of councillors don't actually understand that public libraries are a statutory service under the 1964 Public Libraries and Museums Act. If councils don't provide a comprehensive and efficient library service, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport can intervene. But heads of service are ultimately officers of the council. So you have this kind of Janus thing where you're busy shouting at your chief executive to say, how can you possibly be proposing this restructure, these cuts, this closure? It will have a terrible effect on my service. And then having to turn round and say to the public that this is what the council is doing, and this is what, and you're the fall guy. You're the person who stands there as the head of the service responsible for this. It's a very difficult position for any officer to be in. They can't always be as vocal in support of their services under threat as they might like, but CILIP can ensure that councillors are fully aware of the implications of the actions that they take. And CILIP has also recently produced a document called Come Rain or Shine, a new way of looking at the future of library services, on all library services across the whole sector, based on futures literacy. In a nutshell, and it's downloadable off the CILIP website, it looks at the trends affecting libraries at the moment and supports head of library services to think about the things affecting their service and analyse them according to 4 scenarios, presented as 4 different weather analogies. So the first one is storm warning, turbulence and unfettered change on the horizon. The second is sunshine and showers, some good elements, some bad elements. The third is blue sky days where all in the garden is wonderful and everything's developing perfectly. And the fourth is another grey day. And more of the same, things don't get worse, but equally there's no improvement. And accompanying this document is a toolkit which helps service leads examine those scenarios and uncertainties and prioritise and test the potential resilience of their strategic planning. So what it does is it enables an individual approach, but a sectoral umbrella, which says this is what libraries are doing to look at the way their service is operating. This is the way they are responding to an ever-changing environment, because they can adapt it to think about their own service and, using a SWOT analysis, identify the key areas they need to focus on and develop a response. Now, Leslie mentioned and referenced the new international strategy, which was launched last week. And I was really pleased to see that in the strategy, it had 3 underpinning guiding principles for international working. That as members of CILIP, we believe in our fundamental values as expressed in the ethical principles. We recognise that other systems of thought, values and beliefs exist, and believe in the respectful negotiations between belief systems with which we disagree. And how many of us feel that we've lost that ability to, I think Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell sum it up well on their podcast, The Rest is Politics, to disagree agreeably. And that the role of libraries is to create spaces in which conflicting ideas can coexist productively. In other words, we should be promoting an element of debate in everything that goes on and not blind acceptance. And it also goes into 7 goals, 7 clear goals. So CILIP is going to raise the profile of and engagement with the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals by UK library staff. Now, I think this is really important. I would say that the vast majority of library staff in the UK are not aware of the importance of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The UK library staff, information and knowledge professionals, of course. We're going to support the professional development of library staff, information professionals and knowledge managers through the professional knowledge and skills base, encouraging them to become global information professionals. So encouraging that global awareness that we are part of a global family. Going to embed international perspectives, voices and expertise into our outputs and content channels, and proactively seek opportunities to showcase and share the expertise of our members within the global community, both within and beyond IFLA, and to promote dialogue, collaboration and shared learning. To seek opportunities to showcase our new professionals, which goes back to that thing about CILIP really supporting young, new, dynamic staff, professionals from marginalised backgrounds and those seeking professional development through financial and professional support. Strengthen the viability, reach, impact and sustainability of CILIP by growing the international audience for our products and services, including our fantastic Facet publishing arm, and continuing to provide support to the global library, information and knowledge community in times of natural or man-made disaster, which goes back to the comment I made on Leslie's report at the beginning. It's good to see that the strategy has also built in a statement that annual progress will be monitored and assessed against the aims and objectives that are outlined in the document. And CILIP is the 2nd largest library association in the world, and as such has a prominent role to play in driving the international agenda. And I was delighted to fund the beginning of this work, and I'm equally delighted to see it become part of CILIP's aims and objectives through that new strategy. And we all have a role to play in championing CILIP's global influence. I mentioned earlier on the conference that was held as part of the initial year when the international work was being developed under President Ayub Khan's leadership. And one of the things that came out of that, I had been looking at Toronto Public Library's work for quite a while as Director of Libraries, because they are the largest single public library network within the continental North American landmass, so that's America and Canada. And the way they operate is extremely interesting from a financial perspective, which is what interested me. But through that work, I had got to know the chief librarian, Vickery Bowles, who just happens to be, and wasn't at the time, my daughter's boss, because my daughter is the governance officer for Toronto Public Library, because they have a board, like CILIP has a board, that scrutinises everything that they do. And I built up a relationship with Vickery, and so Vickery came and was one of the speakers for the international conference. And I'm taking her out to lunch. Every time I come to Canada, we go out to lunch. And that friendship, that working relationship, that learning from each other is something that I've really learned to treasure. And I think that that is the kind of thing, if we can start to build those relationships across the globe and really, learn from each other in terms of good and excellent practice. CILIP has also engaged the services of an organisation called Devo Inflect. And Devo Inflect specialise in political communications and lobbying, and training in this is about to be launched. Nick Poole, our former CEO, once said to me, and I think it's so true, advocacy is not part of the job, it is the job. And that's absolutely spot on, I think. We all need to help grow our membership in order for us to have the loudest possible voice and influence. And that includes continually emphasising the global standing that CILIP has. And we're lucky to have you guys at ILIG as a group able to support the development of this new international strategy and champion it as well. And finally, just to bring this talk to an end, why does this matter? Why do I believe that libraries are important in the 21st century? Well, first and foremost, reading is a key skill. Without literacy, we cannot function to our full capacity in the 21st century, and reading for pleasure makes reading for purpose easy. In addition, it's been proven to contribute so much to our health and well-being, and it fosters empathy, a skill heralded by no less than Barack Obama as being crucial to our future humanity. Secondly, as I said earlier, the digital world is expanding at a breakneck pace. All the things that I believe libraries stand for, education, recreation, information, and culture, are now inextricably bound to digital development. And libraries help people become digitally enabled. And currently, according to the report that Baroness Sanderson produced in January, commissioned by the government, she quoted the Lloyds Bank Consumer Digital Index and said that nearly 9 million residents in the UK are still digitally challenged. That's about 14%. And libraries can and do help with this. Thirdly, loneliness and isolation is becoming an increasing issue, particularly in those of the older generation. We are more connected than ever through digital means, but simultaneously more isolated. Again, libraries are at the heart of their communities and can alleviate loneliness and isolation. How often have you sat on a bus and watch two friends sit next to one another and they're both on their phones instead of talking to each other? And I worry about what that kind of thing is doing to our brains and to our ability to come together as a community. And again, libraries are at the heart of this. And it's across all library sectors: health libraries, specialist libraries, academic and public libraries. A couple of weeks ago, I went to the CILIP Northern Ireland and Library Association of Ireland conference and heard about a project that two librarians had cooked up between them. They'd met at a previous conference a year before. One was a librarian in a local hospital, which had a neonatal unit, and the other was the library officer for Louth Libraries. And the librarian in the hospital was very concerned because the babies who were in incubators for sometimes 3, 4, 6 months, nobody was talking to them, nobody was reading to them, nobody was singing to them, nobody was having much of an interaction with them. And in fact, I think they did a survey, only 12% of those babies were even being talked to by their parents, never mind anything else. And the dip in their in their development, because they weren't getting that inner stimulus, was really strong. And so what they did was they came up with a project together where the public library provided books, supported the parents in talking to their children, reading to them, singing rhymes to their children, and the statistics went up dramatically. And they now have a group of graduates from the neonatal unit who meet in the library for social activities and bringing those families together. I found that project really inspirational. And it's the kind of thing that libraries are able to do. And so that is why I am so pleased to see CILIP developing strategies in all the areas that affect librarianship across the globe, and using the power and the voice that it has to emphasise the role that libraries continue to play in our daily lives in the 21st century. Libraries are not simply nice to have. They are essential contributors to our daily lives. Thank you very much for your patience, and thank you for listening. And I'm very happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Sue, for such a brilliant and comprehensive overview. Does anybody have any questions for Sue? Questions? I do.
Stunned you into absolute silence.
Okay.
I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for such an enlightening speech, and to see that there is advocacy still taken seriously to save the libraries. I would like to highlight that in the NHS where I work, there is also pressures for restructuring, and we see libraries staff being downgraded or posts being disestablished in favor of the paraprofessionals, and they will ascribe complex work like complex searching to library assistants or the early career librarians, and in a way trying to reduce budgets. And I don't know whether this is CILIP that where you are aware of, and where you can also try to advocate for knowledge evidence is very important. I know you have worked with NHS England here and there, but the structures still make professional librarians report to people who have never worked in libraries, who have no understanding on the value of knowledge, and we are easy targets for being decimated. So we need a professional body that can help engage with the chief executives of these trusts so that they can put librarianship at par with other professional groups. And each NHS library have got a different structure. Some people report to workforce, others in education, others to clinical, and there is a lot of variation across the board. So you really expect a standard to be established. Thank you very much.
If I could just make a few comments. I think, I mean, what you are describing is what public libraries have gone through for the last 10 years. I mean, you know, this still rankles. When I left my post in St Helens, my post was downgraded, and my library manager reported to somebody who blithely said to me, "Oh, I don't read," and I felt like saying, "I can tell," you know. But I mean, I still think, and he was a leisure centre manager, and he just wasn't interested. You know, it was just all bunched together as kind of libraries and leisure. It's all part of the same pot. We'll put them in there, and there is very little understanding, or despite all that we do. And I think exactly the same in health. I think there are certain things. I mean, first and foremost, your next president next year is Sue Bryant, and she comes, you know, she was the chief officer for Health Education England. So she, you know, her background is health libraries. She really understands your sector, and I'm sure will be a huge advocate. Secondly, I think some of the partnerships that are going on can do nothing but highlight the role that librarians play outside their individual sectors. And something that I feel really strongly about is I would really like to see, and I would like to see CILIP 125 as a starting off point of this, the opportunity for those partnerships to lead to shadowing opportunities across library sectors so that people can cross-sector and bring different perspectives into sectors more easily than they can now. People tend to go into health libraries or public libraries or specialist libraries or academic libraries and stay there. And I'd like to see much more cross-fertilisation, much more sort of respect for the overall profession and what it is that we're doing. And some of the partnerships, I mean, you referenced there were some small partnerships, small grants that Health Education England did, and most of those grants went to public libraries to try and raise public awareness of health literacy. So, and then there's one in East Riding, which is about working with a commercial company whose name escapes me. That's a factor of age, by the way. You know, you start forgetting bits and pieces. But what they're doing is you can go into the library and you can have all your vital signs measured, your blood pressure, your weight, your cholesterol levels, all of that kind of stuff, and the information is sent directly to the GP. So that saves the GP time. It also enables the public library to point the person coming into the library service to other programs that they're doing around, maybe chair-based exercise, or perhaps even a garden project for mental health or something like that, whatever is going on. And then Hull University, so you've got the health thing, you've got public libraries, and Hull University Library is monitoring and evaluating that project, so giving it academic rigour for it being able to be used elsewhere. And the other thing that happened while I was at Arts Council was there were two sets of projects that were done with the Wellcome Foundation, called Engaging Libraries, where public libraries had to come up with a project that was around health within their library service. And in the second round, there had to be an academic partner that would show proof of concept and give academic rigour. And those partnerships have really grown and developed. And perhaps one of the most striking ones is the one that straddled both parts, which was around death. And it was around how you deal with death in the 21st century, not just the practical issues, but also, how you prepare mentally, emotionally for end of life, and coming together with other people who are perhaps in that same thing. So there's lots of opportunities for cross-fertilisation. And I think the more we can raise the profile of what libraries do in that space, the better. And perhaps the final thing I would say is that the best thing that happened to you guys was the work that you did during the pandemic. The way that you were able to show, to collate all the research, all the information about the progress of the disease, the progress of cure, vaccination, measures that should be taken for medical professionals so that they didn't have to do it at the end of a long working day. So health is very much, I think, in the forefront of thinking about how we can promote those health libraries as well.
Oh, thank you very much. It's good that Sue Williamson is coming on board, so she'll carry on the agenda of advocacy. Thank you. Yeah.
Make sure she's onto it. Any more questions for Sue?
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah. Yes, of course.
So I want to ask about apprenticeships and where you mentioned that. So just what your thoughts are on what might influence a library team to offer the apprenticeships that CILIP Pathways do. And also whether there's any plans at CILIP to expand the number of apprenticeship places in the sector.
Oh, I can't answer that. I don't know the answer to that.
I thought it might be a question
but I'll
for
find
someone
out
else,
for you.
But I wondered what your view was on it.
Well, I mean, I'm hugely in favour of the apprenticeship programme. I mean, for the reasons that I stated. I mean, I am a chartered librarian, but I did it through the ACLIP route. And I think what is one of the problems that the profession faces is that it's very difficult to attract young people into the profession. So it's lovely to see you here today, but we know from the workplace survey that we talked about at the conference last year that we have a real problem with an ageing workforce. And to attract young people, obviously there is the route that you can go down where you go to university and you get a qualification in librarianship. Now, I'm going to say that for my sector in public libraries, the problem with that is that if you have professional librarian after your name, I would have expected you as a head of service to have loads of experience of managing libraries, managing teams, and managing events and activities. So when you come out of university, I can't employ you. I just can't, because the roles I'm offering that require you to be a professional librarian aren't there. So the only way that you could come into that somebody with a degree could come into librarianship is to start at the bottom and work their way up, and hope that, you know, positions will become available and they will be able to apply for them and work their way up through the service. Now, what the apprenticeship does is it enables somebody who goes into, perhaps gets a Saturday job at a library, to think, oh, you know what, I could make a career out of this. I could go for an apprenticeship. I could work my way through that. When I've got that, I can do the ACLIP, and then I can go on to charter. And then I will have done that. Now, I don't know where you're phoning from. I mean, what part of the country?
Oh, I'm in Lancashire.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I was born in St Helens.
Well, if you're in Lancashire, and part of Lancashire are one of the leading authorities on the apprenticeship programme. And indeed, because I lived in Lancashire until very recently. I lived just outside Chorley, and the library in my village, Eccleston, the apprentice there was Apprentice of the Year in Lancashire, and she went on to be one of CILIP's 125.
Yeah, Sinead.
So, sorry?
Yeah, I know Sinead.
No, Heather.
Oh, Heather.
Yeah. So I think, you know, like, if in terms of Lancashire's example, I mean, you're living in the county which has probably the best and the strongest record. It's been there right from the beginning, working on the development of the apprenticeship programme. So Julie Bell, your head of service, has been part and parcel of devising how this works, and has been really, really strong in advocating for it. So I would say that, you know, you are an exemplary service in how to do it, and how to encourage more services to take up that route. The other thing which should be coming on stream in the not too distant future, and again, I started it when I was at Arts Council, and I was told that I think they're planning for it first to be implemented in the early 2025 is accreditation. So we haven't had library standards for a long time. But this will enable library services to be assessed as either excellent, good, or working towards good. And it will be administered by the Arts Council. And that could well be one of the things that comes up on it. Do you have the apprenticeship programme? And I haven't, I've been retired now for 18 months, so I haven't seen the final development stages of this programme. But I think that will make a big difference, because it will enable library services to go to their chief execs, if they're working towards good, and say, look, this is what a good library service looks like, and this is what we aren't doing and what we should be doing. And hopefully that will include apprenticeships. But clearly one of the things is having mentors that can support those apprentices going through the training. So that's possibly something that any of you who've done might be interested in picking up as an extracurricular activity.
There's a follow-up question in the notes.
Sorry, I haven't got the notes up.
Sorry, the chat.
Yeah.
From Jamie Finch, actually from CILIP Wales. Will apprenticeships be extended to Wales?
Oh, now then, I think they should be. So I will go back and ask the question, Jamie. But I would imagine that that's something that we have to talk to about with CILIP Wales. And I think aren't you now something quite senior in that area now?
Oh, well, I'm non-video at the moment because I'm
for
various technical reasons. But yeah, I'm the chair of CILIP Wales, so I'm new in post, but I'm learning, and the conference is next week, so we'll see how that goes as well.
Well,
but
Jo's going, isn't she? Jo
Yes.
Cornish is coming to your conference.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, well, Jo is Miss Apprenticeship Guru.
Okay.
So she's the best person to ask that question.
I will. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Alice.
And I see it's in my haste, because all sorts of things were happening around the time I was trying to log on. I misspelled my name on when I signed in. There is a crucial difference in law between lobbying and advocacy. And my understanding from having been involved with various charities for many, many years, charities are not allowed to lobby, but they can advocate. And I don't think that distinction, that point is always realized. And so sometimes with the best of intentions, it occasionally those best defense misfire because lobbying is tried instead of advocacy. And that's what worries me.
Well, I think this is why CILIP have employed Devo Inflect to steer us through those waters about what we can and what we cannot do and how best to go about it. And I think also our new CEO has a very strong background in that area. So I think will be a great asset to us. And the other thing, sorry, just before, I mean, do come back to me, but the other thing I would say is that there are kind of middle ground areas like the APPG that CILIP occasionally convenes within the Houses of Parliament, which enables various themes to be discussed and questions to be put to library officers about things that government is interested in. So that's kind of like a halfway house, if you like. So, and also, I'm not sure, I wonder just how much change there might be on the horizon around what is permitted within Parliament and what is not permitted within Parliament. I mean, in America, for example, lobbying is an accepted way of conducting oneself, and so I'm not aware of anything, but I just wonder how things might change over the next Parliament or the next two Parliaments.
You mean the charity law might be revised?
I'm just wondering whether that might ultimately be an option. I mean, the thing is, one of the things which I mean, I think it's a constant thing of surprise to people that to people in power that when library closures are mooted, people go to the barricades. And they can't quite conflate that with why do they go to the barricades when we can see usage dropping? And I mean, I would possibly argue that the ways people use libraries are slightly different from the ways they used to use libraries, and libraries are adapting and changing to that all the time. But I think that they are deeply rooted in our sense of what civic society looks like. And the people who are campaigning against library closures are a thorn in the side of people. So that might stimulate some kind of analysis of whether that's the right way of going about things. And that's all I'm saying. I mean, I have no insider knowledge, nothing like that. I'm just wondering whether, the changes might happen. I mean, and I'm not ruling out potential changes to the 1964 Act either.
I've been in the position of being chairman of a charity and being told by one of my trustees to do something which would, of course, is to break the law and cost us a lot of money. So I know it. So I went to the Citizen Advice Bureau and put it to them, the problem to them, and they sorted it out for me.
Well, that's a very interesting point, and thank you very much for raising it. Because, as I say, one of the things that CILIP has organised for the board and for the staff over the next 6 weeks is 6 sessions of training with Devo Inflect about how we do this. So I will make sure that if I get the opportunity to question that I will, if they don't cover this point, I will ask them to clarify.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? I have 2, I think, if nobody else does. The first is a big one. What would you say to the criticism? I mean, you've given a wonderfully comprehensive overview of some of the problems facing public libraries in particular, which are so important to so many people in this country. What would you say to the criticism that CILIP really shouldn't be giving time to developing an international strategy now? Its focus should be on sorting out or helping to sort out the internal problems in the UK with libraries.
I think that I genuinely think that CILIP can't afford not to do either, to be honest. I think if it doesn't position itself in support of the public library network and the closures that your previous caller was talking, what the previous questioner was talking about in health library systems, because as I was listening to him, I was thinking this is exactly the road that public libraries went down 10 years ago. And academic libraries are in a very similar position, because the cost of e-materials to academic libraries is really, really stretching them. And as we all know, what tends to happen is that it's staff that tend to get that tend to be rationalised. We can do this job with fewer staff, on lower salaries. So it's a universal problem across librarianship. So I think CILIP if it's going to remain, if it's going to be viable, or it's going to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Relevant in the librarianship sector, it has to have a position on that. It has to be in the forefront of the debate. It has the benefit of not being, what I said earlier, the officer of the council or in some way dependent upon government. It is the only independent voice that libraries and library staff have across all sectors. So it has to do that. Secondly, we live in a very small world. I mean, I have, my daughter lives here in Canada, my son lives in Hong Kong. We visited both of them this year. And, so getting that business of bringing people together, being part of a global family, learning from each other, learning from the developments is so important. And again, I feel that so many of the issues that CILIP is talking about, so the green libraries issue, the issue around independent thought, around censorship, around what libraries stand for, what the collections stand for, what the staff stand for. I mean, IFLA is not holding a conference this year, but it is holding a seminar in Mexico on precisely that. That is something that affects all of us and is absolutely at the root of what libraries stand for. This business of encouraging people to pointing them in the direction of the right information, not to influence the way they think, but to enable them to develop the way that they think in an independent way. So whether that's through online articles, newspapers, journals, wider reading, whatever you might like to call it, it's about putting that stuff in front of people and saying, this is the thought leadership on these issues. That's what you need to access. And CILIP absolutely has to be doing that, has to be part of that. And I think also highlighting the position of the library staff in part of in developing countries, I think highlights just how foolish we are in throwing away the excellent and brilliant library services we have in this country. You know, when you, again, Libraries Connected posted a picture in Ukraine of a library in rubble, pretty much in rubble, with a few shelves with a few books on. And you see some of the countries in Africa where people are literally taking collections of books round on a donkey as a mobile library, because education is the route to development, is the route to change, is the route to freedom. And we seem to have lost sight of that. So I think CILIP has to do both. Has to be at the forefront.
I think in this group in particular, we would all 100% agree with that. So thank you. And that's very much the way that I've responded when I was asked the question myself recently. It's very much also why we thought it was important to say something and start documenting attacks on libraries in particular worldwide, and make sure that people knew about them. Yeah,
I mean, it goes back to that thing I said, that Umberto Eco thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That in the medieval ages, if you were in a library, you had access to knowledge, and access to knowledge was power, and it enabled you to keep the rest of the people who didn't have that access to knowledge under control. And we just see that written large now, don't we?
We do.
In the way, and so, you know, libraries are still vitally important in that.
Just a follow-up question. You talked about the importance of shadowing, and I think you mentioned bursaries. We have been quite conscious, and I don't think we're alone in this, that the take-up of bursaries, particularly for international work, is quite low. And I think we're aware that there are quite a lot of barriers to people taking them up, and that maybe we should be thinking a bit more inventively about the sort of work that we fund. Do you have any views about how we might make them
That's interesting.
easier?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, I think the thing is that developing a partnership in terms of sort of shared aims and objectives of work that you are doing, that maybe you can benefit from each other, building those connections. One of the issues that comes out of austerity and reductions of staff is that staff time is very precious. So it's very difficult. I mean, when I first started out in libraries, CILIP used to do a 3-month bursary that you could go, and I remember applying for it and not getting it, where you could go overseas to do something. Now, to be perfectly honest, in those days, you know, if I'd won that scholarship, I could have gone and said to my head of service, you know, I've won this scholarship, and they'd have said, great, off you go, have a great time. But these days, you know, members of staff, I mean, you have just about enough members of staff to manage to deliver your service, with perhaps 1 or 2 in reserve to cover sickness or holiday. But you don't have a superfluity of staff, which means that it's easy to free them up to go away. So the partnership working, and this goes not just for international work, but also cross-sectoral working, it needs to be mutual. So if you send somebody to work in a health library, or send somebody to another country to work in a library, you need somebody to come back. Yes. You need somebody to come and fill that, you know, it needs to be a mutual thing, I think, in order to make it work. Otherwise, you're going to find that people are saying, I'm sorry, I just can't free you up to do this. I haven't got the staff reserves to enable you to go away for a month, 6 weeks, or whatever. So, you know, I would probably start out by saying, you know, because during, I mean, when we were doing the international work, of course, COVID hit. So the physical going off to another country to do a project or something was very difficult to manage. So we ended up doing those online collaborations, and I'd start with something like that. You know, setting up a network where people can build those relationships, perhaps talking to other library organizations like Maple or Oblida, you know, sort of bringing those people together. The British Library do a program every year where they encourage librarians from all over, or library staff from all over the world, to apply to come to the British Library for a week's conference. Now, I sit on the panel for that, for selecting those librarians. And for the last 3 years, I've gone up every year, and I will be going up. It's the night before the CILIP conference. I'll be going up there that evening to the British Library, meeting those young people who've come over from all different library backgrounds all across the world. And that programme, when it first started, I mean, they only really needed to turn down a few people. Well, this year they've had about 150 applicants for the 24 places. So over those 3 or 4 years, it's gone up dramatically. That people from all over the world have wanted to come, to possibly because IFLA is not happening in its usual way this year. But I think that's really encouraging, to be honest. But I would start with something that you can do that doesn't involve the physical, build the relationships, and then think about how maybe you can manage something physical after that.
Yes, thank you. I think a hybrid approach, as you're suggesting, has to be the way forward nowadays for so many things, including this. But it's interesting that you talked about library exchanges. Now, there were library exchange programs in the past, and I'm not aware of one that's been operational for many years now. And I have no feeling for how practical or popular one would be nowadays.
Well, maybe it isn't something that you start with. Maybe, the first thing you have to do is build the relationships. When you build the relationships, people get really, start to think, I could really learn from that, from going and spending some time with that library. So, I mean, the two things, for example, that really excited me about Toronto Public Library was, one, a programme they do called Leading to Reading, where they have volunteers across the whole of Toronto who work on an individual basis with people of all ages who can't read. So, and you can opt as a volunteer as to whether you want to work with children or with teenagers or with adults, and you get proper training, and then you're paired up with somebody and you work with them until they don't need you anymore. And that's how my daughter first got involved in Toronto Public Library. She did that on a volunteer basis and worked with a young child, and I thought that was a fascinating project. And the other is that they have a trust. And of course, anything that raises money is something that was of great interest to me. The trust, they have a trust arm, and that trust raises something like $5 million a year for the Toronto Public Library Network. And the National Archive have just set up a trust arm as well. So I was trying to explore how that might work in a library setting. And it would have been great for me to come out to Toronto and spend some time actually working with, understanding the trust, understanding how it worked. And I did spend quite a bit of time talking to the National Archive about the hoops they jumped through with government to set up that trust arm, what the limitations were, etc., etc. So it's that kind of thing where you see something that a library is doing, or a way that a library is operating, or a program that they're doing that excites interest, or something where you think that what you're doing is very relevant to what they're doing, that excites that interest to work together, and then perhaps leads to something where you say, actually, it would really help if I could go out and see them, spend some time working with them.
Yep. Yes, I'm sure you're right. Thank you. Any more questions for Sue, or if we perhaps let her go and spend time with her grandchildren?
Well, Anna's in daycare, so it's grown-ups day today.
Seriously, are there any more questions? Or I don't think there are. Are there?
Just a quick question. So obviously, partnerships and relationships are always very, very important, and making them work is always very, very tricky. But how do you also stop them from becoming toxic and exclusive, so that you just create a new version of the old boys network?
That's a very that's obviously down to the personalities concerned, really, and perhaps about, in terms of thinking if this is a route you want to take and something you want to develop, it's about building that into the terms of reference and the terms and conditions before you even start. You know, what are the parameters that you're going to do this under? And it might be a time limiting thing, or it might be a project limited thing, so that it's not in perpetuity. But I mean, to be honest, I would say that on the whole, most library people are good people and you work well together in partnership. And I mean, let's face it, there isn't much in the way of money involved that's likely to queer the pitch, as it were. I mean, it is about relationship building and development, and certainly I think watching how the British Library have handled this annual influx of international library staff, I think it's been really good in terms of building those wider networks and those wider contacts. I mean, even down to the state that, for example, if I had a question about something, one of the people on my list of people overseas that I would send that question to would have been Vickery Bowles here in Toronto, Eric Boekenstein in the Netherlands. You know, I would have a list of librarians that I'd come across on an international front that I would want their perspective on, which was a different perspective from the perspective within the UK, in terms of perhaps, you know, encouraging debate and potential change. So I think there are things, safeguards that you can put in place, but that's about developing them from the beginning and not trying to introduce them perhaps later. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, because I'm just very conscious that whenever, quite often when you hear sort of senior leaders in even within CILIP discuss things, they always refer back to the same people. And I know, and we're trying to widen profession. Obviously, we're trying to bring on younger people. But how do you do that? How do you make sure that you don't miss innovative people that are in other places and other spaces? Yeah. So thank you.
I think that's a very good point, and I mean, I've just exemplified it. But I think perhaps one of the things that I would say in defence of this is that if you are at a senior level in an organisation, you tend to talk to senior people in other organisations. So, but what I would say is that that's where something like CILIP 125 comes in. And the library's connected awards for various, for the work that's done around the 4 public library universal offers. So it's highlighting work done by young people in libraries. And I think, I mean, one of the things I've been pushing ever since that came out is every time we're putting a forum together to discuss future policy, future strategy, people from that 125 group have got to be on that forum. We've got to be having their voice heard now. And so, and in terms of, you know, if we get a critical mass, if we get a critical mass, I mean, one of the things, for example, if there was somebody who came to me and said, you know, I want to do something around X, I might go to somebody like Vickery or Eric and say, do you have a young professional that's crossed your consciousness who's working in this area that I could partner that person up with? And that's how you build those relationships, is how you develop them. It's about, you know, finding the cohort that exists at your level and keeping those contacts throughout your professional life and growing and developing them. And that's where I think CILIP and ILIG could start to, you know, to start build that network of contacts.
Yes, and expand,
Yeah,
maybe.
Sorry, I quite agree. And I would also say, building it across types of library as well, and size of library, and not just going for public school and NHS. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think, you know, the projects that always excite me is when I've seen people like the one I talked about with the neonatal unit, where people have just been talking over dinner and thought, you know what, we could work together. We could work together on something and let's grow it and develop it.
And I would absolutely agree that expanding the range of possible contacts is hugely important.
Mhm.
Otherwise, there is a danger it becomes a group of people who all know each other. So if we, if there are ways that we can help with expanding those networks, that would be wonderful. Okay, I think we should probably come to an end there. So it just remains to thank Sue so much for such an interesting talk and engaging so willingly with I knew we would have questions. Just took us a moment to get going, but I knew we would have questions.
Well, librarians are always reflectors, you know, they
Yes.
think about things before they actually come up with a question. Yeah.
Yes.
Hello.
Oh, hello, Tamino.
Anna's dog.
Honourable member of the ILIG committee you have there. That is Tamino, Anna's dog. So thank you so much. And if we can all perhaps thank Sue in the traditional way, if it's only
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed being here, and I'm very grateful that you invited me.